Tangier, in the spring of 1952, was the most interesting city in the world. This is not a neutral assessment. Poirot made it on the morning of his arrival, standing on the deck of the ferry from Gibraltar as the city came into focus across the strait, the white buildings climbing the hillside above the harbour, the pale minarets, the Kasbah walls, amber in the early light. And he made it with the specific quality of appreciation he reserved for places that were genuinely unusual. Not beautiful in the way of Paris or Venice, not grand in the way of London or Rome, interesting, complicated. A city that had decided not to belong to anyone, and had spent decades in the enjoyment of this decision and the production of the specific conditions that belong to no one produces. The international zone of Tangier in 1952 was administered jointly by several European powers and existed in a state of institutionalized ambiguity that attracted, with the natural logic of ambiguity, everyone who had reason to prefer ambiguity to clarity. Diplomats and spies, artists and criminals, people with money and people seeking money, people with secrets and people who collected secrets. People running toward something and people running away from something, and the city had the specific quality of a place that had seen enough of both to have stopped distinguishing between them. Poirot was there because of Hastings, specifically because Hastings had been in Tangier for 3 weeks on business, connected to an old friend from his Argentina years who had settled in the city and was involved in import operations of an entirely legal but elaborate variety. And Hastings had written to Poirot with the combination of enthusiasm and mild desperation that characterized his communications from exotic locations. "You must come, Poirot. The city is extraordinary. And there is a matter here that I think requires your specific attention." The matter. Poirot had been intrigued by the phrase. Not a problem, not a case, a matter. Hastings's selection of the word suggested something that was not yet fully formed, something he was not sure how to classify. He had come. He came off the ferry at 8 in the morning with his valise and his Homburg and his expression of a man prepared to be interested, and found Hastings waiting on the quay with the specific air of someone who has been waiting for 20 minutes and is relieved but cannot, in the relief, entirely suppress the undertone of anxiety. "Poirot," Hastings said. "Thank God." "Something happened last night." "Tell me," Poirot said. "Not here," Hastings said. He looked at the quay, the fishermen, the porters, the men who stood at quays in port cities watching arrivals with the professional attention of people for whom arrivals are information. "The hotel, the Minza. I have a car." He had a car. They drove through the waking city, the morning light on the white buildings, the narrow streets of the Medina coming to life, the more European streets of the Ville Nouvelle still quiet, the smell of salt and bread and diesel, and something floral that Poirot could not immediately identify. "Last night," Poirot said, "a man was found," Hastings said, carefully, "at the Grand Socco, the big market square. He was found by the night watchman of one of the stalls at approximately 2 in the morning. He was dead." "The city's authorities," Poirot said, "have been informed. The British consul has been notified. The man was British, or partly British. His name, the identification in his pocket said, was Philip Crane. I met him twice in the previous week. He was staying at the Minza." Hastings paused. "He was connected to the matter I wrote to you about." "Tell me about the matter," Poirot said. "At the hotel," Hastings said. "There are people I need you to meet." The Hotel Minza stood on the Rue de la Liberté, a broad, tree-lined street. That was the Ville Nouvelle's closest approximation of a European boulevard, with the quality of a hotel that had been receiving a specific kind of guest for several decades and had learned to accommodate that guest's requirements without asking too many questions about them. It was an Andalusian palace converted to hospitality, with mosaic tilework and carved plaster, and a central courtyard with a fountain that the April morning was filling with the specific sound of water in a tiled enclosure. Hastings had a suite on the first floor. Poirot was given the room beside it. In the courtyard, over mint tea and the almond pastries that the Minza produced from somewhere in its kitchen at all hours. Hastings told him the matter. 3 weeks ago, Hastings had arrived in Tangier on the import business. His friend, an Argentinian named Ramirez, whose operations involved textiles moving between the Moroccan interior and European buyers, had introduced him, in the way of Tangier introductions, to the small community of British and European residents and regular visitors who comprised the city's professional and social life at the level Hastings occupied. Among these introductions, a woman named Celia Drummond, 44, who had been in Tangier for 6 years and who ran a small antiquities business, Moroccan craft objects, Berber jewelry, the occasional genuine historical piece from a shop in the Medina. She was, Hastings said, a woman of considerable intelligence and very specific knowledge of the city and its networks, and, separately, a man named Edward Voss, 51, who was in Tangier on what he described as diplomatic business, connected to his current position in the Foreign Office. He was the kind of Foreign Office man Hastings had known enough of them in his various foreign residencies to recognize the type who had a designated function and a real function, and preferred not to be asked to specify which was which. And Philip Crane, 47, the dead man. He had arrived in Tangier 12 days ago on what he described as a research trip. He was, or had been, a journalist who wrote on North African political affairs, which was a description broad enough to cover a considerable range of actual activities. These three knew each other, Poirot said. They knew each other, Hastings confirmed. Or at least, they were aware of each other. Tangier's European community is not large. The Minza is a specific gravity center. People who pass through with certain kinds of business end up here. And Philip Crane, Poirot said. He is dead at the Grand Socco, and the cause of death. The consul's physician examined him this morning. The early assessment is it is being described as a heart attack. He was 47 and not in the best of health, by appearances. The physician's report will take a day or two. He paused. But Celia Drummond came to me last night, before Crane was found. She came to my room at 11 o'clock, and she told me that Crane had come to her shop that afternoon and told her he believed he was being followed. He told her he had something, a document. He called it a document that certain people would very much like to have, and that he was not going to give it to them, and that he needed to get it to London without it being intercepted. And then he was found dead, Poirot said. And then he was found dead, Hastings confirmed. The document, Poirot said. Where is it? That, Hastings said, is the question that I believe is animating everyone in this hotel at this moment. She was waiting in the courtyard when Hastings brought Poirot down at 10, seated with a glass of tea, and the specific quality of someone who has been awake since the previous evening and is managing this with the controlled efficiency of someone for whom being awake all night is not entirely unusual. Celia Drummond, at 44, had the look of the long-term expatriate, the quality of a face shaped by years in a climate and a context other than the one it started in, a visible adaptation, like a plant that has grown in one direction for so long that the direction has become its form. She was handsome rather than beautiful, with the kind of face that demands attention not for conventional prettiness, but for the quality of the attention it pays to the world around it. Her eyes moved with the specific alertness of someone who has lived for 6 years in a city where information is the primary currency and has developed, through this, a constant monitoring habit. She told Poirot what she had told Hastings, with one addition. He gave me something, she said. Philip did. When he came to the shop yesterday afternoon, he gave me an envelope and asked me to keep it for him. He said if anything happened to him before he could collect it, I should give it to someone at the British consulate whose name he wrote on the outside of the envelope. She paused. The name on the outside of the envelope is not someone I know. It is not the consul or any of the consul's staff I have encountered. She paused again. It is the name of the man staying in room 14. Edward Voss, Poirot said. She looked at him. You know him? I know of him, Poirot said. My colleague told me about the guests. Tell me about Voss. She was quiet for a moment. I have been in Tangier for 6 years. In that time, I have met a great many people with Foreign Office connections. Edward Voss has been here 3 times in those 6 years, always for short periods, always described as diplomatic business. The first time I saw him, I thought he was a certain kind of diplomat. The second time, I revised my assessment. This time, she stopped. This time, I believe he and Philip Crane were here for the same reason. And that reason is not diplomacy and not journalism. What is the reason? Poirot said. There is a man, she said. A German man, now living in Tangier. He arrived 18 months ago. His name is the name he uses here is Karl Brandt. He is not German by birth, or not only. He is the kind of person that the specific context of the recent war produced. A man of several national identities and considerable intelligence work experience, who is now in Tangier because Tangier is the place for such people to be. A former intelligence operative, Poirot said. A former operative who worked for several parties at different times, in the manner of such men, who has, over the years, accumulated information that is still valuable to several of those parties, and who is now, I believe, attempting to sell some of that information to whichever buyer offers the best price. She paused. Philip Crane was a journalist. Yes. He was also, I believe, acting as an intermediary for a British intelligence interest in acquiring whatever Brandt was selling. And Voss, Poirot said. Voss is the principal, she said. Crane was his instrument in the field. Crane had the contacts, the language, the cover story. Voss had the authority and the money. And Brandt, Poirot said. He is still in Tangier? He has a house in the Kasbah, she said. He has been there 18 months. He will not leave easily. Because? Because whatever he is selling, he cannot sell it from a position of movement. He needs to be accessible, to be found. And the information itself. She paused. I believe the information is not a document exactly. It is knowledge. Knowledge that only Brandt possesses. But there is a supporting document, a physical record that corroborates what Brandt knows, and without which the knowledge is simply an old man's claims. She held Poirot's gaze. I believe that document was what Philip Crane was carrying, and I believe that the envelope Philip gave me is connected to it. The envelope, Poirot said. Do you have it with you? She reached into the bag beside her chair and placed a manila envelope on the table, sealed. On the outside, in handwriting that had the slightly hurried quality of someone writing under pressure, Edward Voss. Urgent. You have not opened it, Poirot said. Philip asked me to give it to the person named on the envelope, she said. That is what I intend to do. But, she paused, Philip is dead. And the man named on the envelope was, as far as I can determine, in this hotel when Philip died. She left the implication where it was. Poirot received it. Room 14 was on the first floor, 3 rooms from Hastings's suite, 4 from Poirot's. It had a balcony facing the garden that the Minza's back section looked onto. And on this balcony, in the April morning, Edward Voss was reading a newspaper with the focused ease of a man who reads in the specific way that intelligence people read everything in the paper and the manner of its presentation as potentially relevant. He was 51, with the quality that certain men acquire after decades in professions that require the management of appearance. A kind of smooth density, a surface that was agreeable and presented nothing that would invite specific reading. Medium height, well-dressed in the understated way of someone who has learned that conspicuous presentation is a liability. He had good eyes, watchful without appearing to watch, the specific skill of the professional observer. He received Poirot's knock with the blandly pleasant manner of someone who has been expecting something to arrive and has prepared a reception for it. Monsieur Poirot, he said. I was told you had arrived. By whom? Poirot said pleasantly. The hotel manager mentioned it. You are a notable guest. He held the door open. Come in. The room had the quality of a professional space, not in the obvious way, not with files and equipment, but in the specific way of a room in which someone has been doing work and has been careful about how that work is arranged. The surfaces were clear. The bag in the corner was closed. The newspaper on the balcony table was the only object in sight that was not entirely in order. Poirot sat down. Voss sat across from him. "Philip Crane," Poirot said. "A sad business," Voss said. "He came here for your purposes," Poirot said. "He was acting on your behalf in the matter of Karl Brandt and whatever Brandt has been offering." Voss looked at him with the expression of a man assessing how much was known and deciding that the known quantity was sufficient to make full performance of ignorance counterproductive. "Philip was a freelance," Voss said. "He worked for various interests." "He worked for you on this occasion," Poirot said. "He was found with your name written on an envelope that he gave to Celia Drummond yesterday afternoon, instructing her to deliver it to you in the event of something happening to him." He paused. "Something has happened to him." Voss's face did something. It was a small thing, a very brief reorganization of the composed surface. "He gave something to Drummond," he said. "He gave Drummond an envelope with your name on it," Poirot said. "I have not opened it. Miss Drummond has not opened it. It is intact." "I would like it," Voss said. "You will have it," Poirot said. "When I understand the full picture of why Philip Crane is dead, and whether the full picture is something that should be in the hands of Japp's counterparts at Scotland Yard, rather than in your hands alone," he held Voss's gaze pleasantly. "You are Foreign Office. You have authority in certain spheres. Philip Crane is dead. The sphere of authority over a dead man is not automatically the Foreign Office's." Voss was quiet for a moment. "What do you want to know?" "Karl Brandt," Poirot said. "Begin there. Karl Brandt's history, as Voss told it, with the specific, careful incompleteness of a professional who gives sufficient information to achieve cooperation without giving all information, was the history of a man who had spent 20 years being useful to people who needed things done in the shadow spaces of international events. Born in Austria in 1900, moved through various European intelligence structures in the 1930s, worked for the German intelligence services during the war, in a capacity that had involved extensive contact with British and American operations. Not a double agent in the formal sense, more what the intelligence world described, with its characteristic indirection, as a man who understood the art of the possible. After the war, he had been of interest to several services who believed he knew specific things about specific operations and specific individuals. He had spent several years in the orbit of various intelligence communities, providing information in exchange for protection and money. And then, 2 years ago, he had stopped. He went to Tangier, Voss said, settled, bought a house in the Kasbah, stopped providing information and started offering it at a price. "What changed?" Poirot said. "He found something," Voss said. "Or rather, he had always had something, and he decided, when he felt old enough to not care about the consequences, to use it." He paused. "Something from 1943 and 1944. An operation, a British operation that was conducted in North Africa, in this region, that involved the betrayal of a network of French resistance contacts to the German intelligence services. The network was destroyed. 7 people died. And the British operation," Poirot said, "was authorized by someone who is now—" Voss stopped. "Someone who is now in a position of considerable public prominence in Britain, who has built a career, in part, on the reputation of a wartime record that was heroic, rather than the record of a man whose decisions resulted in the death of 7 people. The document Brandt has," Poirot said. "It corroborates this. It is a record of the authorizing communications," Voss said. "Cables, orders, the documentary trail of a decision made at a specific level of the wartime intelligence structure. With those documents, the case is unambiguous. Without them, it is Brandt's word against the word of a man with the full weight of his public position and his reputation. And Philip Crane was here to acquire these documents," Poirot said. "To complete the acquisition," Voss said. "Brandt and I had been in negotiation for 3 months. Crane was the final element, the person who would physically complete the transaction and bring the documents back to London. He paused. But then Crane was found dead at the Grand Socco, and the documents are either with Miss Drummond in the envelope or somewhere else entirely. Who else knows about the acquisition? Poirot said. Voss looked at the window. That is the question I've been asking myself since 6 this morning, he said. The person whose wartime record is at issue, Poirot said. He would have reason to prevent the acquisition, if he knew about it, Voss said. And does he know about it? Poirot said. Voss's composure showed a slight fracture, the very specific fracture of a man acknowledging that his operation has been compromised. I think he may, he said. Because Philip Crane, he stopped. Philip Crane had very good contacts. He was also, it is possible, not as exclusively loyal to this operation as I believed him to be. He may have been playing both sides, Poirot said. I think it is possible, Voss said. And if he was, and if the information about the acquisition reached the man we are discussing, then Crane's death is not a heart attack, Poirot said. Voss said nothing. I need the name, Poirot said. The man in London. The person whose wartime record is at issue. Voss was quiet for a very long time. Then he said the name. Poirot recognized it immediately. A man of considerable prominence. A man whose public life had been built, in significant part, on a specific wartime reputation. A man who had, through the 15 years since the war, accumulated the specific political and social capital that war heroes accumulate in England. If the documents surface, Poirot said, his position is untenable. His position, his career, and potentially his freedom, Voss said. The 7 people who died were French citizens. France has an interest in this matter. And who represents his interests in Tangier, Poirot said. Who, specifically, is in this city that you are aware of beyond the principles we have discussed with reason to prevent the acquisition? Voss looked at him with the expression of a man who is about to say something he has been thinking for some time and has not said. There is someone, he said. In the hotel. I have been watching them since yesterday. Their name, Poirot said. She is staying in room 8, Voss said. Her name is, she is registered as Frances Holt. She arrived the same day as Crane. She has been watching the people in this hotel. He paused. Including me. Frances Holt, room 8, was 36 years old, and was when Poirot knocked at 11:30 in the middle of packing a bag. Not the casual packing of someone reorganizing luggage. The specific, methodical packing of someone who has decided to leave and is leaving at the first available opportunity. She heard the knock and did not immediately open the door. Poirot heard, from the other side, the specific silence of someone weighing options. Then the door opened. She was 36 and she had a face that had been pretty in a conventional way and had acquired, over whatever the previous 10 years had contained, a sharpness that was more interesting. She was dressed for travel, practical clothes, the minimum of ornamentation. The bag on the bed was half full. She looked at Poirot and then looked past him at the corridor. He told you about me, she said. Mr. Voss noted that you had arrived the same day as Mr. Crane and had been observing the hotel's guests, Poirot said. May I come in? She stood back. He came in. She sat on the edge of the bed. She did not close the bag. She did not pretend she had not been packing. I work for a man named Alderton, she said, after a moment. The name meant something to Poirot, not immediately the specific name, but the category of man. Alderton is he employed me to come here and establish whether certain documents existed and, if they did, to prevent them from being acquired by the people Voss represents. You work for the man whose wartime record the documents concern, Poirot said. She looked at him steadily. I work for a man who has asked me to protect his interests. I am a private inquiry agent. The nature of the interests I protect is I prefer not to always know. But in this case, you know, Poirot said. In this case, I have inferred, she said. I inferred enough to understand what Philip Crane was doing here and why. I inferred enough to understand who else was here and for what purpose. And Philip Crane, Poirot said. He was found dead at the Grand Socco last night. I know, she said. Where were you between 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock last night? She looked at him. In my room, alone. No one can confirm this. She paused. Crane was poisoned, I expect. The Tangier authorities will call it a heart attack, because calling it a poisoning creates complications they prefer to avoid. But Crane was in reasonably good health for his age, and he was poisoned. How do you know this? Poirot said. Because I was in the Medina yesterday evening, she said. At 8 o'clock, I followed Crane. He met someone not Brandt, someone I didn't recognize in a cafe in the small Medina near the Petit Socco. They had tea. I could not hear what was said. When they parted, Crane went toward the Grand Socco. I did not follow him beyond that point. She paused. I did not kill him, but whoever he met in that cafe may have. The person he met, Poirot said. Describe them. She described a man in his 50s, dark-complexioned, well-dressed in a way that was international rather than specifically local, carrying a briefcase. Not Moroccan, she thought. Spanish, possibly, or Italian. He had a briefcase, she said. When they parted, Crane had the briefcase. He was carrying it when he walked toward the Grand Socco. And the briefcase was not found with Crane's body, Poirot said. She looked at him. The consul's inventory of Crane's possessions, Poirot said, as provided to Hastings, does not mention a briefcase. Which means someone took it, she said, between the Grand Socco and the discovery of his body. Yes, Poirot said. She looked at the half-packed bag. She looked at Poirot. I am going to ask you something directly, Poirot said, and I would appreciate a direct answer. Did James Alderton, the man you work for, instruct you to prevent the acquisition by any means necessary? Not merely by observation and intelligence, but by any means. She was quiet for a long time. He told me, she said carefully, that the documents reaching London would be catastrophic for him. He used the word catastrophic. He told me I had complete authority to manage the situation as I judged necessary. And you understood this to mean. I understood this to mean that I had discretion. She looked at her hands. I did not use that discretion to harm Philip Crane. I want to be completely clear about that. I was watching this situation. I had not determined a course of action beyond surveillance and, if necessary, an attempt to acquire the documents myself before they could be transmitted. The envelope with Miss Drummond, Poirot said. Her eyes moved slightly. You know about the envelope. I know about the envelope, Poirot said. Miss Drummond has it. It is intact and in my safekeeping as of this morning. He paused. Miss Holt, I am going to tell you something, and I would like you to think carefully about your response. The man in the cafe, the one who met Crane, who may have been the last person to see Crane alive, did you see where he went after the meeting? She was still for a moment. He came back to this hotel, she said. There were 9 registered guests at the Minza on this Tuesday morning, including Poirot himself. Hastings provided the register. Madame Laurent, the manager, had been diplomatically willing to provide it in the context of Poirot's implicit suggestion that the alternative was a formal consular inquiry. 9 guests, Poirot and Hastings. Celia Drummond, who had a standing arrangement for a room at the Minza on certain nights when business kept her in the Ville Nouvelle. Edward Voss, Francis Holt, and 4 others whose names and ostensible purposes Poirot now examined with the attention they deserved. A Mr. and Mrs. Fletcher from Manchester, celebrating their anniversary touring the region, which was an increasingly popular thing for British couples to do, and they had the specific quality of people doing exactly what they said they were doing. Comfortable, pleasant, entirely innocent of anything except enthusiasm. A Professor Gerard from Paris, who was in Tangier for academic purposes, connected to his research on pre-Islamic North African archaeology. He was 63, and he had the absorbed quality of a scholar who is primarily present to his research and secondarily present to the social world, which is the quality that makes scholars good witnesses, in that they observe without constructing narratives. And a man registered as Mr. R. Santos, arriving from Gibraltar, 49 years old, whose registration card listed his occupation as import-export and his home as Lisbon, Santos. Dark, complexioned, well-dressed in an international way, possibly Spanish, possibly Portuguese, possibly Italian languages, and physical types that overlap in the Western Mediterranean. Arriving from Gibraltar, which meant the same ferry Poirot had come in on, which meant arriving in Tangier the previous morning. In time to meet Crane in the café at 8 in the evening. Poirot went to find Santos. He was in the hotel garden when Poirot found him seated in the April sunshine with a coffee and a newspaper. The specific ease of a man who is waiting without appearing to wait, in the way that certain professionals have perfected. He was 49 and he had the quality that Francis Holt had described accurately, a face and bearing that were international rather than specifically local. The product of a life spent in several countries, the edges of each smoothed into the general competence of a man who goes where he is needed. He looked at Poirot with the assessment of a professional, looking at another professional, and said, "You are the detective. I was told you had arrived." "Everyone seems to have been told," Poirot said. He sat. "You met Philip Crane last night in a café in the Medina." Santos looked at him with the expression of a man deciding how much the person across from him actually knows versus how much they are implying they know. He made his assessment. "I met Crane last night," he said. "In the Café Central, near the Petit Soco. We had tea. You gave him a briefcase. He gave me something, and I gave him something in exchange," Santos said. "The nature of the exchange is professional." "He is dead," Poirot said. Santos's composure remained, but something behind it adjusted. "I heard," he said. "Between the café and the Grand Soco where he was found, he had the briefcase. The briefcase was not with his body. Someone took it." He paused. "Who knew about the meeting?" Santos looked at the garden, the orange trees, the tile work, the fountain that they could hear from here. The meeting was arranged through intermediaries. The arrangement required several communications. Each communication is a potential breach. He paused. I represent a specific interest in this matter, an interest that is not British. My principals have been attempting to acquire the same documents through the same channel through Brandt, independently of the British operation. They became aware of the British operation 6 weeks ago and have been attempting to coordinate, or to prevent, Poirot said. To acquire the documents in a manner consistent with my principal's interests, Santos said, with the careful language of a man who has been trained to present things in careful language. My principals have their own reasons for wanting the specific historical record to be established. Reasons that are not identical to the British intelligence interest. France, Poirot said. Santos looked at him. I cannot confirm or deny. The 7 people who died were French, Poirot said. France has an ongoing interest in the events of 1943 and 1944 and the people responsible for them. France would have a very direct interest in acquiring documents that establish responsibility for a specific network's betrayal. He paused. What was in the briefcase you gave Crane? Santos was quiet. A letter of authentication from Karl Brandt establishing the provenance of the documents and their specific connection to the 1944 operation. Without the letter of authentication, the documents themselves are ambiguous. With it, they are unambiguous. So the documents and the letter of authentication need to be together, Poirot said. Separately, they are insufficient. Separately, they are circumstantial. Together, they are definitive. And the documents themselves, Poirot said. Where are they? Santos looked at him with the expression of a man who has arrived at the point of the conversation where what he says next will determine the shape of everything subsequent. With Karl Brandt, he said. Still, Crane was to take the letter of authentication to Brandt and complete the transaction, receive the documents in exchange for the authentication and the British payment. But he never arrived at Brandt's house. Someone stopped him at the Grand Soco, Poirot said. Someone who knew about the meeting and the exchange, Santos said. And who took the briefcase, and who therefore now has the letter of authentication, and can use it to complete the transaction with Brandt impersonating the British operation, or arriving with their own offer and the authentication already in hand to demonstrate the seriousness of their interest, or someone who simply wanted to prevent the transaction, Poirot said. Someone who represents the man whose record the documents implicate, who did not want the documents to reach London or Paris or anywhere else. Frances Holt, Santos said. Miss Holt denies taking the briefcase, Poirot said. Miss Holt works for Alderton, Santos said. She came here to protect Alderton. She came here to observe, Poirot said. Whether she moved from observation to action, that is the question. He paused. The briefcase. Do you know what Alderton's instructions to Miss Holt were? I know that Alderton learned about the transaction from someone close to Voss, Santos said. That is how he knew to send someone here. He had a source inside the British operation. He paused. If Holt knew about the cafe meeting, she knew it from Alderton, who knew it from his source. And if she took the briefcase, she would have done so at Alderton's direction, Poirot said. Or on her own initiative, Santos said. If she understood that the transaction was about to be completed and that the authentication was the critical element. Poirot was quiet for a moment. Mr. Santos, I am going to need your cooperation, not on behalf of your principles. On behalf of the truth of what happened to Philip Crane. He held Santos's gaze. A man is dead. The question of what he died of and who is responsible is more important than any document or any authentication or any intelligence interest. I hope your principals will agree with this. Santos looked at the garden for a long moment. What do you need? He said. Brandt's house was in the upper Casbah, reached through a sequence of increasingly narrow lanes that the Casbah's geography produced with the logic of a place that had been building itself organically for several hundred years. The house itself was invisible from the lane, a blue-painted door set into a whitewashed wall, no different from a dozen other blue doors in 100 other whitewashed walls. Celia Drummond had brought them. She knew the Casbah with the specific knowledge of someone who had spent 6 years in the Medina, building a business that required navigating its geography and its human networks simultaneously. She knocked at the blue door and spoke in Darija, the Moroccan Arabic of Tangier, to whoever was inside, and eventually the door opened. Karl Brandt was 52, and he had the quality that a certain kind of life produces. A man who has been valuable to several parties, and has therefore survived several situations that should have killed him, and who carries the evidence of these survivals, not in visible scars, but in the specific quality of his attention, which was total and immediate, and gave nothing away. He received them in the house's central room, a traditional dar, with its central courtyard and the rooms arranged around it. The second floor visible above, the afternoon light coming through the courtyard into the space where they sat. He knew Celia Drummond. He looked at Poirot with the assessment he had directed at everything, the immediate, total evaluation of value and risk. The Belgian detective, he said. His English was accented but fluent. Crane mentioned you might come. He said he had told a man named Hastings that the Belgian detective should be contacted if anything happened. He paused. Something has happened. Crane is dead, Poirot said. I know, Brandt said. News travels quickly in this city. It was not natural. No, Poirot said. It was not. The briefcase that Santos gave Crane last night, the letter of authentication, was taken from Crane before or after his death. Someone in the city has it. Brandt looked at him. Without the authentication, the documents are insufficient, he said. With it, they are. I know, Poirot said. That is why we are here. I need to understand the full structure of what Crane was involved in and what the document says about Alderton. And I need to understand this before the person who has the authentication reaches you. Brandt was quiet. He looked at the courtyard, the afternoon light, the small orange tree in the corner, the sound of the city above the walls. Alderton, he said. James Alderton. You know the name. I know the name, Poirot said. In 1944, a man holding the position Alderton held in the wartime intelligence structure made a decision, Brandt said. The decision was to provide to the German intelligence services the names and locations of a French resistance network operating in the Moroccan sector. The network had 7 members. 5 were captured. 3 died under interrogation. 2 survived and were exchanged. 2 were killed in the field before capture. 7 total, Poirot said. 7, Brandt confirmed. The reason for the decision, I do not know with certainty. I know that the British operation in this sector at that time was in competition with an American operation for the same intelligence sources. I believe Alderton sacrificed the French network to protect a British source that was duplicating it. I believe it was a calculation, the French network, in exchange for the protection of a British asset of greater strategic value. And you have documents establishing this, Poirot said. I have the communications, the cable traffic between the relevant stations, the authorizing orders. They are specific. They name Alderton in his wartime role. They describe the decision, with Santos's authentication letter, which establishes the provenance of the documents and my role as the custodian of this specific archive. The chain of evidence is unambiguous. The documents are here, Poirot said. The documents are here, Brandt confirmed. In this house. They have been here since I arrived in Tangier. You have not moved them, Poirot said. I have had no reason to move them. The house is secure. No one knows they are here except the parties to the negotiation. He paused. Until someone knew enough to take the authentication from Crane. Someone is coming, Poirot said. Either the person who took the briefcase or someone they send. They know the authentication is now available, and they will try to use it to complete the transaction on their terms, or they will come to destroy the documents rather than let them be used. Brandt looked at him steadily. What do you propose? I propose, Poirot said, that we complete the transaction tonight, with the correct principals Voss representing the British interest, and with the documents going through the proper institutional channels rather than through the informal route Crane was using. He paused. And I propose that we do it before whoever has the authentication arrives at this door. Brandt was quiet for a long time. Then, there is a problem with your proposal, he said. Tell me the problem, Poirot said. Voss is not the correct British principal, Brandt said. Voss is Alderton's man. Poirot sat in the courtyard of Brandt's Casbah house in the afternoon light and was still for a long time. Voss was Alderton's man. Not British intelligence representing the historical record. British intelligence representing the man the historical record indicted. A man who had sent a professional Voss to acquire the documents, not in order to establish the truth, but in order to suppress it. Who had sent Crane as the instrument because Crane was expendable, and because Crane, playing both sides, had been both useful and dangerous. And who, when Crane had become too dangerous, when Crane had acquired the authentication and was close to completing the transaction through channels that Voss could not fully control, had made a decision. The third side, not French, not the formal British interest, Alderton's personal operation, using institutional cover to pursue a private end. Who else is in the British diplomatic structure in Tangier? Poirot said. Celia Drummond looked at him. The consul himself, she said. Martin Wheeler. He has been here for 4 years. Wheeler is not part of whatever Voss is doing. He is a career diplomat. He is clean. We need Wheeler, Poirot said. He telephoned from the house Brandt, had a telephone and reached the consulate and asked for Wheeler, and when Wheeler came on the line said, This is Hercule Poirot. I am calling about the death of Philip Crane and the matter he was investigating. I need to see you immediately. I need you to come to a specific address in the Casbah, alone, without informing anyone on your staff of your destination. Wheeler, to his credit, came. He arrived within the hour, a lean man of 58, with the specific quality of a career diplomat who has seen enough to be unsurprisable, and who received Brandt's existence and Brandt's documents and Poirot's account of the full picture with the controlled attention of Someone integrating a great deal of information very quickly. Voss, he said, when Poirot finished. Voss works for the man the documents implicate, Poirot said. He has been here under the cover of legitimate intelligence work to suppress the transaction, not to complete it. And Crane, Wheeler said. Crane was Voss's instrument until Crane decided to play his own hand, Poirot said. Crane met with Santos, the French interests representative, and acquired the authentication letter. He then gave the envelope to Drummond to deliver to Voss, which tells me, he paused, which tells me that Crane had concluded that Voss was not what he represented himself to be, and that the envelope was Crane's insurance. He named Voss on the envelope because naming Voss forced the matter into the open. If Crane died with Voss named as the recipient of the authentication, anyone investigating would look at Voss. He was setting a trap, Celia said quietly. He was setting a trap, Poirot confirmed. And then he was found at the Grand Socco. You believe Voss had Crane killed, Wheeler said. I believe Voss had access to Tangier's specific resources and understood the city's specific capacities for managing problems of this kind, Poirot said. I cannot yet prove that he arranged Crane's death, but the pattern, he held Wheeler's gaze, the pattern points in a consistent direction. And the authentication letter, Wheeler said. The briefcase. Who has it? That is what I need to establish before we can complete the transaction and get the documents into the correct institutional hands. He paused. But I believe, I know. He knew because of the sequence. Frances Holt had been in the Medina at 8 in the evening. She had followed Crane to the Café Central. She had watched him meet Santos. She had seen him leave with the briefcase. She had not followed him to the Grand Socco, she said, but she had gone back to the hotel. Voss was at the hotel. Voss knew about the meeting. Voss had a source inside whatever Santos represented, the same way Alderton had a source inside Voss's operation. Voss would have known that the meeting had occurred. He would have known that Crane now had the authentication. He would have understood, with the speed of a professional who had been managing this situation for weeks, that the transaction was now within hours of completion and that his window for prevention was closing. And then Crane had died. Not at the Grand Socco of natural causes. But the briefcase was not with the body, which meant either Crane had been relieved of it before his death, or it had been taken after. Either way, someone who knew the briefcase existed and knew its significance had removed it. Poirot thought about the sequence, about the hotel and its guest rooms, and the specific proximity of those rooms, and who was next to whom, and who could have seen what from where. He went back to the Minza. He knocked on the door of Frances Holt's room. She was there, she had not left, despite the half-packed bag. She opened the door with the expression of someone who had been expecting this knock. The briefcase, Poirot said. She looked at him for a long moment. Voss, she said. Tell me. Poirot said. She told him. She had gone back to the hotel after watching Crane in the café. She had been in her room. At approximately 11 o'clock, she had heard movement in the corridor, the specific quality of movement that is someone trying to be quiet. She had looked through her door crack. She had seen Voss in the corridor, moving toward the stairs with a briefcase. Not Crane's briefcase, she said. Voss's briefcase. But Crane's briefcase was... I had seen it when Crane left the cafe with it. Dark brown leather, a silver clasp. The briefcase Voss was carrying had a dark brown leather exterior and a clasp that caught the corridor light. She paused. I did not put it together immediately. I thought nothing of a man carrying his own briefcase through a corridor. It was only later, when I heard about Crane. Where would Voss have gone with it? Poirot said. At 11 o'clock at night in Tangier. He has contacts, she said. Voss has been in this city 3 times. He knows its geography in the specific way of someone who has worked here professionally. She paused. There is a man, Alderton's local contact, who operates from a house near the American legation. I had his address from the briefing I received before I came. She wrote it on a piece of paper. If Voss was taking the authentication somewhere to secure it or use it, that is where he went, Poirot said. He went to find Wheeler. Wheeler moved quickly. with the efficiency of a consul who understood that the situation required institutional authority and speed. He made 2 telephone calls, one to a contact at the Tangier administration, one to a contact Poirot did not inquire about, and by 10 o'clock that evening, Voss had been detained at the house near the American legation, in the company of Alderton's local contact, in possession of a dark brown leather briefcase with a silver clasp. Inside the briefcase, Santos's authentication letter. The 3rd day in Tangier had a different quality from the first 2. The first day had been the quality of arrival, new information, new faces, the assembly of a picture from its components. The second day had been the quality of urgency, the pieces connecting, the direction clarifying, the specific race between the completion of the transaction and the people who wanted to prevent it. The third day, the Wednesday morning, had the quality of resolution, not the dramatic resolution of a case brought to its single violent point, but the slower, more complex resolution of a situation that had several parts and required each part to be addressed separately. Wheeler handled Voss through official channels, the specific channels of diplomatic affairs, which are not the same as ordinary legal processes but which have their own weight and their own consequences. Voss was removed from Tangier. The circumstances of his removal were described in the official communications that Wheeler showed Poirot as related to conduct incompatible with diplomatic status. The specific nature of the conduct was in the way of official communications, not specified. Santos took the authentication letter and combined it, in Wheeler's presence, with the documents that Brandt had held for 18 months. The combined package was transmitted to the relevant institutional address in Paris through channels that Wheeler facilitated. The consul understood that the French interest in the matter was legitimate and that obstructing it was not in anyone's long-term interest. The question of what would happen to James Alderton, the man whose wartime record the documents concerned, was not a question Poirot could answer from Tangier. It was a question for the institutional processes of 2 countries and the specific legal and political mechanisms that such processes involved. It would be slow. It might be imperfect. But the documents were now in the correct institutional hands and the chain of evidence was intact, and that was the condition that made everything else possible. Philip Crane, the physician's analysis, completed by Wednesday morning, had found, in the residue of the tea glass at the Café Central the glass Crane had used, identified by the café owner with the cooperation that Wheeler's official presence facilitated a substance consistent with a specific kind of cardiac toxin, not undetectable, not with proper examination, but not detectable in a standard examination, of a man found dead at 2 in the morning in a public square by a night watchman who expected nothing unusual. The question of who had administered it, whether at the café, in the tea, or whether Crane had been reached by some other means between the café and the Grand Socco, was a question for the ongoing investigation. What was established was that it was not natural. What was established was that the briefcase had been in Voss's possession. What was established was the full picture. Poirot sat in the Minza courtyard on the 3rd morning, with Hastings and Celia Drummond and the fountain, and the orange trees, and the April light of Tangier, at its best, the light that made the city look like a painting of itself. And that justified, in this specific hour, everyone who had ever decided that a city belonging to no one was the most interesting city in the world. Brandt, Hastings said. What happens to him? He has served his purpose, Poirot said. His information is in the correct hands. Whether he faces any personal consequences for his wartime activities, that is a question the institutions will determine. He is 52, and he has been living carefully in a city that accommodates careful living. I suspect he will continue to do so. And Francis Holt, Hastings said. Miss Holt came here to protect a man she was employed by without full knowledge of what she was protecting, Poirot said. When the full knowledge became available to her, the understanding that Voss was not who she thought, and that Crane's death was connected to the operation she was part of, she told me what she had seen. Without that information, the connection to Voss would have been much harder to establish. He paused. She is not innocent of all complicity. but her complicity is of the kind that belongs to people who are given partial information by employers and who make reasonable inferences from the parts they have. He looked at the orange tree. She will return to London. What she does with what she now knows about Alderton, whether she maintains the employment or terminates it, whether she considers herself obligated to provide what she knows to anyone officially, that is her decision. Alderton, Hastings said. The man himself is in London, Poirot said. With a career and a reputation, and the full weight of his public position, and the knowledge, now, that the documents exist and are in institutional hands. Whether the institutions have the will and the authority to bring the matter to a formal conclusion, that I cannot determine. He sipped his tea. But the documents exist. The record is established. These things cannot be undone. Celia Drummond was looking at the courtyard with the expression of someone who has lived in this city long enough to have a specific relationship with the word established. In Tangier, she said, nothing is ever simply established. Everything is subject to renegotiation. That is true of Tangier, Poirot said. It is also true of the world beyond Tangier. The difference is that in Tangier, the renegotiation is visible. Elsewhere, it is conducted beneath the surface of propriety and protocol, which makes it harder to see but no less real. He set down his tea glass. The documents are the beginning, not the end. You sound tired of it, Hastings said. Poirot looked at the fountain, the small, steady sound of water in a tiled enclosure in a city that was 3,000 years old and had seen the passage of many powers and the persistence of none of them, and the persistence of the city itself, belonging to no one, and therefore in its own way belonging to everyone. I am not tired, Poirot said. I am reflective. These are different things. He stood. We take the morning ferry. You don't want to stay, Hastings said. The city is extraordinary, Poirot said. It is also finished with us for the moment. And I prefer London in April to Tangier in April, Hastings, because London in April is cold and unremarkable, and the tisane at Whitehaven Mansions is made precisely as I require it, which the Minzer's kitchen, admirable as it is, cannot replicate. He put on his Homburg. Come, the ferry does not wait. He walked out of the courtyard and through the tiled entrance hall and onto the Rue de la Liberté, where the Tangier morning was doing its April things, the light on the white buildings, the smell of bread and exhaust, the city going about the ordinary business of being extraordinary. He walked without looking back. Hastings, behind him, looked back once at the hotel, at the courtyard visible through the entrance, at the city, rising behind it, up the hillside to the Casbah, where the blue door of Karl Brandt's house was one of 100 blue doors in 100 white walls. Then he followed Poirot toward the harbour. The matter resolved itself, the way matters of this kind resolve not in a single, clean, public moment, but in a series of institutional communications and private negotiations and the slow working of accountability through structures that are imperfect, but are, in the end, the only structures available. James Alderton resigned his public position 6 weeks after Poirot returned from Tangier. The resignation was described, in the announcement, as voluntary and connected to health. The people who needed to know the real reason knew it. The people who did not need to know did not know. This is the English way with these things. Philip Crane's death was officially attributed, in the Tangier administration's record, to a heart attack of natural causes. The British Foreign Office received a separate private communication from Wheeler that made the true finding available to the relevant parties. Whether this private communication led to any further action was not something Poirot was able to determine. Santos conveyed, through a letter addressed to Celia Drummond's Tangier shop and forwarded to Whitehaven Mansions, the appreciation of the French interest for the outcome of the matter. The letter was signed with an initial and contained no other identifying information, which was consistent with Santos and consistent with the general principle of the matter. Poirot read the letter at his desk with his morning tisane and noted its contents and placed it in the file with the case notes and closed the file. He looked out at the London morning April, cold, Unremarkable, exactly as described. Hastings appeared at noon, as he did periodically when London was being boring enough that he came to Whitehaven Mansions to be less bored. He had the expression he always had when a case had concluded and left behind it the specific residue of unfinished business that certain cases produce. Alderton resigned, he said. Yes, Poirot said. That's all? He just resigns? The 7 people who died in 1944 are still dead, Poirot said. The resignation does not change that. What it changes is the record, the public record, the institutional record, the account of what happened as told by the structures that keep those accounts. It is insufficient. It is also what is available. It doesn't feel like enough, Hastings said. No, Poirot agreed. It rarely does. He picked up his tisane. But it is more than there was 3 weeks ago. The documents exist. The record is established. The families of the 7 people who died can now, if the institutional process continues as it should, have that record acknowledged. He paused. These are not small things. Crane, Hastings said. He died for this. Crane died because he was playing a dangerous game in a dangerous city on behalf of several parties simultaneously, Poirot said. He knew the risks, not the specific risk of that specific evening, but the general risk of the work he did. People who work in the shadow spaces between official interests understand, on some level, what those spaces are capable of. He held his tisane in both hands. But yes, he died in the course of bringing something closer to the light. That matters. I prefer to note that it matters rather than noting only that he died. 3 days, Hastings said. 3 days in Tangier and you. 3 days in Tangier and the grey cells had sufficient material, Poirot said. The city provided everything. It always does. Every city provides everything if you attend to it properly. The specific geography, the specific history, the specific community of people brought together by their reasons for being in a place that belongs to no one. He set down his cup. Tangier is very efficient in this respect. The density of relevant information per square meter is unusually high. Hastings almost laughed. You liked it, he said. I found it, Poirot said. Extraordinary. He looked at the window. I also find London in April entirely adequate. These things are not in conflict.